Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our seminar. It's our first seminar in quite a while, and today we have a very special guest. We have Professor Adrian Holliday from Canterbury Christ Church University, and is going to tell us about something which is quite close to my heart, because both Native-speakerism and the concept of cultural hybridity is something that has obsessed me since my master, which seems like a lifetime ago. So, without further ado, I'm so happy to see this many people who registered today. And as always, before we begin, I just want to remind everybody that the meeting is being recorded. So if you have concerns with having your face shown, it's all right. You don't have to show your face on camera. And if you have any questions for Professor Holiday, you can open up just your microphones at the end, or you can just write something in the chat. But that's really all I have to say. Professor Holiday, the floor is yours whenever you
Okay.
feel like
Well,
to start.
thank you very much for inviting me. It's a very nice honor to be asked to speak to this forum. My presentation is a little bit messy, as usual, and I'm talking about ideas that I'm still developing. Let's see how it goes. I don't have too many slides, but I have a lot to say about each one, so I hope I don't get lost. Putting aside native-speakerist labeling and finding something different. And I guess the main idea here is that if you somehow manage to look at things completely differently without the labels that you're used to, you might begin to see something completely different. And I had an experience recently, which I'm going to talk about, which enabled me to do that a little bit. So now, how do I get to the next slide? Oh, there we go. All right. So first of all, why do we have to try and put aside this labeling? First of all, I think that there is a sustained, continuous, unavoidable, deep, profound colonizing effect of this native, non-native speaker business. It's a discourse that's been normalized or institutionalized or naturalized or whatever word you want to use, and it's entered everyday popular belief. And I was taking part in a seminar some time ago, and there were teachers there from around the world, and some of them were saying, look, it's all right saying that it doesn't matter whether we're native speakers or non-native speakers. It's the parents of the children who come to our classes who tell them that we are not native speakers, and this is very difficult. So this is a discourse that has entered everybody's everyday mindset, and it's just there. So I think still continuously there is a marginalization of so labeled, and I'm going to use that word, non-native speaker teachers and students. And I will connect this very strongly to Orientalism, Edward Said, which is all about the way in which the West imagines the rest of the world, especially the East and the South, and so on. This is a massive grand narrative, and it connects with this idea of other non-Western cultures being collectivist, high context, them. And I know this from my personal experience, because I recently wrote a book about my experience of teaching English in Iran in the 1970s, and I explored where my prejudices came from that I took with me into that situation. All through my upbringing, I was fed with this Orientalist narrative. It was there everywhere. Children's stories, school education, cinema, all sorts of things, absolutely everywhere. This idea that the East is somehow incapable, indolent, needs to be helped. And it's hidden and it's strong because the major narrative that the West is there to help everybody makes it look okay. So all through my career in Iran, in Syria after that, in Egypt after that, I was there to help these people in these other cultures to learn how to be active and independent thinkers, and absolutely ridiculous. When I first went to the British Council Centre in Iran, 1973, can you believe? Most of the senior teachers were Iranian teachers, and they were saying fantastic things about the nature of English. They were intellectually charged. They knew what they were talking about. They had full ownership. They were telling their students to be creative with English. After a year, the British Council decided to modernize, demoted all of them, and flew in London-appointed teachers. And the London-appointed teachers wrote the materials for the Iranian teachers, and suddenly everything changed. At that time, I wanted to be recognized as a professional because I was there privately. I wasn't sent in from London. And I just swallowed the whole thing. And I just believed in it. And it took a long time for me to get away from that. So that's the Orientalist false grand narrative, which is absolutely everywhere. But then something that I still find very difficult is that there seems to be a bandwagon, and Kumaravadigulu has talked about this, people wanting to continue to compare native and non-native speaker teachers and students as if these are real categories. And it doesn't help. Somehow we need to work on these categories that to me just don't exist. In my entire experience, once I put aside my prejudices, which is difficult, but once I do, I can't think of any single examples of the non-native speaker stereotype. It just doesn't exist. And moreover, another thing that sustains these ideas is the acronyms. As soon as you have NNS, NS, NEST, non-NEST, as soon as these things appear in articles, they freeze the discourse. Acronyms are very, very powerful. And this is why you've got to do the work of continuing to say, so labeled, and spell the whole thing out, so it doesn't look as though it really exists. And then connected with this is the very strong, powerful separated cultures model. And there's a little picture of it on the right hand of the screen there. And Anibal Ciano, I read recently, and also Kanagaraja has talked about this. We are being organized. Not only people outside the West, but everybody is being organized by these ideas of national cultures. And then the way in which this organization enters into colonization. It derives from Emil Durkheim's structural functionalism, 19th century sociological theory. It's easy positivism because it neatly puts everybody into boxes. I was listening to Hanif Qureshi on the television last night, and he said, you know, it wasn't until everybody got worried because they were migrants that people even used to talk about their religions in the way that they do. We've been organized and put into boxes by colonization. And so what you then get in each of those separated cultures, one of those circles is language. And language, classroom, family, whatever you want to have is locked inside the system. So English becomes locked inside and native to, confined to a particular individualist, low context Western culture. That's what that model does. It locks the language inside the culture. And recently people are saying, well, okay, this is blurred now by globalization. So because of globalization, we have to learn how to be with each other. I think this is the wrong way around. And again, I'm following people like Kanagaraja and Stuart Hall and so on, who say we were always hybrid. We always have blurred identities. This has been removed because of these powerful colonizing structural functionalist systems. So this is difficult. However, I have to be very careful here because, and I'm thinking about people like Selvi in an article that he wrote recently with two colleagues, people who use the non-native speaker label as an act of resistance. But this is a different discourse, I think. This is saying we who have been labeled in this way have to speak out about who we are. But as long as it continues to say we who have been labeled rather than this is who we are, so there's a massive difference between saying we are non-native speakers, we are native speakers, and saying we have been labeled as non-native speakers and native speakers. And as long as we have that phrase, we have been labeled, then everything begins to change. And then using the labels becomes an act of political resistance, which is extremely important. And it's not for me to say that because I'm lucky, I'm labeled for my entire life as a native speaker. But, you know, that also has lots of problems, and people have been writing about that. Okay, so let's move on to the next slide. If I can get to it. There we are. What do we have to do? So this is a difficult third space, and I'm using third space not in the way that it's often used, which is the negotiating space between cultures, because that belongs to that model. I'm using third space instead to mean an uncomfortable, difficult place where you have to be in order to see something different. It's got nothing to do with being between cultures. It's to do with being outside the structures. It's almost impossible, almost impossible. And the reason for this is because we have structures which do everything they can to prevent it. So academic structures, research structures, educational structures, university structures, professional structures. I know how hard it is to get published. And if it's the case that journals more easily publish research which sticks with the labels because it's easy positivism, then yeah, you're going to publish in that way because that's how you get promoted. And I really appreciate that. I'm at the end of my career. I don't have to worry about getting promoted, but I really feel for my colleagues who are trying to work their way through. So that's an issue. I'm also thinking about Kanagaraja's famous example of the secondary school students in Sri Lanka who are working with Colonel Lessons, the American version of Colonel Lessons, and they're taking part in the lesson, but they're writing their own script into the margins of the textbook. And when you look at the script they're writing into the margins of the textbook, there's much more going on than what the teacher can see in the normal process of teaching. And he argues that this is the school structures that prevent the teachers from really seeing what's going on in the mind of the student. And I got a recent example of that. I was involved in a pan-European project called Child Up, which was to do with the children of migrants in European schools. And what they were trying to recognize in this were the wonderful, fantastic, rich cultural identity experiences that migrants bring with them, and treating that as a major resource for being in the new place that they were. But the school systems just didn't allow it. The school systems had to define school children in a particular way so that those realities were just not recognized. And I hear this from my education colleagues. There are so many things that children bring to the schools that the structures make it difficult to express. So we have problems, and they're all around us. And sometimes we have to take part, and it's easy to be sucked into these things. It's very, very easy. But what we need, therefore, is a major disruption, something that shakes us out of this experience. And this is what happened to me a couple of years ago. I was in a hospital outpatients department for 8 hours on 2 consecutive days. And since then, I had minor illnesses, and I've been in and out of hospital quite a lot. I'm completely better now. So I experienced this. Now, it is the case that in the British hospital sector, there is massive diversity. So when I was there looking around at all the people waiting and the health professionals, there was a huge diversity in every respect. I hesitate to use the word ethnic, but I'm going to anyway. Massive ethnic diversity. I could hear different languages being spoken, different types of English being spoken, and everybody was watching each other. I knew that some of the health professionals were foreign nationals who were in Britain for a short period of time to work in the NHS, but I couldn't tell which of them were in this category. So when I saw somebody who, for example, had a South Asian appearance, they could have been British for 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 generations, or they could have arrived recently from South Asia to work in Britain. There was no way that I could tell. And moreover, and here was me, you see, trying to make sense, I couldn't tell who were the native and who were the non-native speakers. Initially, I thought, lack of information. And then I thought, no, an opportunity. I can begin to see something else. And this is when I began to really appreciate this very cultural reality. I use the word very cultural in the same way as I use varifocal for my glasses. Some of you who are older might know about varifocal glasses. The focus changes in tiny ways from the top to the bottom of the glasses, and there are no boundaries. So what I see is a seamless flow of huge cultural diversity, massive cultural diversity, there in front of my eyes. And actually it's everywhere. And I'm just going to read out a list of the sort of things that I'm talking about. And I'm calling these cultural styles, the way in which we go about our lives. Customs, stories, histories, national myths, traditions, institutions, rules for doing things, religious environments, food, practices of eating, sleeping, washing, greeting, practices of all those things, treatment of guests and the management of privacy, architecture of buildings, use and design of streets, use and arrangement of shops, use and arrangement of rooms, furniture, floor space, and so on. What might be termed psychophysical features such as proxemics, hand and face. There's massive diversity, and we know this. As soon as we travel to a very foreign place, all of these things seem different. And what I remember when I was 23 years old in Iran, in my wife's parents' home, the rooms were used differently. The whole living space was arranged differently. The sense of privacy was different, but privacy was there. It was just done differently. But when I go back and think about that, once I can remove my prejudices, how did I cope with that? I coped because I brought with me already a huge experience of cultural diversity. When, as a young child, I went to my grandmother's house from home, the rooms were different. They ate in different ways. The food was different. The arrangement of time was different. It was completely alien. So already I have this experience of cultural diversity before I travel to the other side of the world. Now, this is very important. So the orange messiness is the cultural diversity which we explain, which we experience every single days of our lives, and it's flowing in a seamless, I don't know, it just goes on forever. We construct cultures from that diversity, and those cultures are of all types, whether they're national cultures, civilizational cultures, family cultures, work cultures, and so on. They're all constructed. And those blue lines also mean that when we are looking at this, we are also doing the constructing. When we do research, we construct. So this is very important, and it's a problematic issue because I think this implies agency. Now, in the Child Up project, with the children with migrant backgrounds in European schools, the big driving point in that project was that every single child possesses agency wherever they come from. But this agency sometimes is not apparent, but it has to be believed in. Now, this goes back to Max Weber's sociology, social action theory, and I think I'm probably, saying something that many people wouldn't agree with. I do not believe, and I'm not prepared to believe, that in every single cultural environment there isn't agency. Even if you're born into a system which is there already, somebody somewhere in the past has constructed it, has created it. These things don't exist by themselves. We are not defined by our cultures. We make our cultures, even if it's generations before. Even if we don't have the power at the moment to do anything about it, it doesn't mean that somebody somewhere has the power to do something about it. So, we're all suffering from these academic structures, and it's really difficult being a mid-career researcher having to deal with these structures. It doesn't mean there isn't agency. We have to believe in this. What's happened in the separated cultures model, the West has claimed monopoly of agency and choice and social action. Actually, if you read people like Ciano and Kanagaraja and so on, this belongs to everybody. Okay, so what does this mean? So there's a particular case. We're all waiting in this outpatient's waiting room. They tell you when you arrive that it might take 5 hours before you're seen by a doctor. So when a nurse comes out and speaks to me, everybody is watching. When a nurse comes out and speaks to anybody, I'm watching because I'm waiting for my turn. There's absolute scrutiny. So here is this hugely diverse room of people, and suddenly this guy comes out and speaks to me. And okay, I'm trying to work out who is who. I have to apply a phenomenological discipline. This is normal in ethnographic research, making the familiar strange, entering into a third space, trying to decenter myself, understanding that there's subjectivity everywhere, and I have to do something about it as a researcher. So I try to work out what's going on. When this young man, I mean, much younger than me, he has, to me, you see, this is my prejudice, a South Asian appearance. I can see his name on his name label, and it looks to me like a South Asian name, but I can't be sure. But you know, this is entering into my head already. And he has an accent of some sort. What do I mean by that? I'm looking at the left-hand side of the sort of figure there, the left-hand side. He looks like a non-native speaker. And I would pretty sure that even though nobody is saying everything, I really believe that most people watching will say, oh, he's a non-native speaker, because this discourse is so deeply embedded. Therefore, once you start with that idea, therefore, whatever he does or whatever he says, he sounds like a non-native speaker. Then all the prejudices start flooding in. Oh, okay. He doesn't have the individualist self-direction to understand personal space. So he's not going to do a very good job as a nurse. He doesn't have the agility of expression to manage this conversation he's having with a patient. He doesn't have the ability to think and speak on his feet, because as we know, people from that part of the world don't think critically, are not self-directed, can't make decisions, etc., etc., etc. He doesn't understand our culture. Now, all the people watching, our culture could mean different things to everybody. All right? So this is me. This is me, the sort of white British patient, and 2 or 3 other white British patients. And this is all within a very high stake, low context medical setting. And I'm just going to strengthen that left-hand side block idea. I was in hospital, and at the far end of the room, there was an old person in bed, obviously having huge difficulty, obviously not well, probably in pain. And there was a nurse who I had spoken to before, again, of a South Asian, East Asian, African, possible, who knows, ethnicity, because of how this person looked. Extremely articulate, very able to speak beautifully and effectively and efficiently to anybody, wonderfully professional. This person in bed was yelling and shouting, I want somebody who speaks my language. I want someone who speaks my language. There was a visitor in the same hospital ward. A middle-aged white woman stood up, went over and calmed the patient down. Completely bypassed the nurse, and the patient was happy. This nurse was labeled and marginalized as somebody who couldn't, who didn't, who wouldn't, and so on, because of the left-hand side. Now, if we go back to this idea of threads of hybridity, this is all the orange stuff on the right in the figure there. We have a completely different picture. And this is what I began to see, what I know, when I put my prejudices aside, whatever his background, like many of us, probably all of us, he has experience of working out how to adjust his language to different high, low context, small cultures. And I think there are such things as high context cultures, but they're all around us. This doesn't belong to particular nationalities. Okay? All of us know what it's like to have to adjust our language to explain difficult technical things to other people. And we also know what it's like to be on the other side of this when we're trying to understand specialist languages and discourses and so on. If this person has traveled from the other side of the world, even better. They have an extended experience across national systems. So this adds to the thread of hybridity they bring with them. However, nevertheless, that nurse is also under harsh scrutiny from everyone. And the other people who are watching this nurse are his colleagues sitting behind the desk, watching him, and all the prejudices, all the institutional issues are coming into play. And how he manages this, and I'm thinking about the concept of strategic essentialism, where, you know, in difficult circumstances, we even take on the prejudices that other people put onto us because it's a way of survival. So this is very, very complex. But getting from the left-hand block to the right-hand thread in that diagram, in that figure, is extremely difficult. But once it's possible to do that, we can end up with a completely new understanding of the original hybrid nature of language and culture. And I just put there, I mean, this is fiction. I don't know if anybody's aware of Elif Shafak, the Turkish writer. Now this is her obviously fictional reconstruction, but she's talking about 13th century Konya in central Anatolia, before it was Turkey, you know, and this is what she writes. And that description resonates with what Kanagaraja talks about, the 5 languages that he lived with when he was a child, and how the ability to work with those languages was actually a resource in opposing the imperialist idea of English. And my colleague Amrita Valli, I remember saying that in the 5 or 6 languages that she lives with every day in her life in India, she is the master of none of them, and she's not a native speaker of anything, but she knows how to deal with language. And so that quotation, I like he said, all of these people get off a similar air of incompleteness, of the works in progress that they were, each an unfinished masterwork. Okay, so going back to this idea, we were all hybrid before we were organized by colonization and nationalism. Leeway's concept of translingual instinct now begins to take on a special meaning for me, because as soon as I enter into a conversation with that nurse, I'm becoming super aware of language and Englishes, as I probably am in other parts of my life. There was somebody on the radio recently talking about employment in Britain, and he actually said, excuse me, this isn't the English I use when I'm at work. He himself in his own mind was thinking that he had different languages. And I'm thinking about Sarah Cheney's statement that, you know, and also Leeway talks about this, that this idea that English is a single thing, even in Britain, is actually a product of the right-hand side of the separated cultures model. And sorry, I'm going around. I'm at the bus stop in Canterbury, and some white British people come and sit next to me waiting for the bus. I struggle so hard to understand what they're saying. You know, there are multiple languages absolutely everywhere. So first of all, discovering the knowledge or recovering the knowledge of my own multiple Englishes. And I'm thinking of Diwali and Saito. So everybody in that room actually were LX speakers of English. There weren't any native speakers at all. And, you know, this might sound like a very small thing, but I'm teaching. I have a class. They are all Ukrainian, and I want to talk to them about discourses and politics and things of that nature. I want to talk to them about grand narratives, and I have a handout, and grand narratives is there. Somebody looks at the handout and says, no, they never understand that word because they're intermediate learners of English and they won't know that word. I think, come on. So all they have to say is, you know, look on your phones and see if you can find the term grand narrative and find out what it means. And they're all looking around, and of course they know what it means because they are from a politically charged environment where everybody knows what these concepts mean. But just the act of inviting people is a tiny little thing. It begins to make a difference. And but it's difficult because what do we therefore do? How do we teach English? I mean, you know, every day I was on the phone to the hospital, to the doctor's surgery this morning to cancel an appointment, which is a very important thing to do. And somebody said, hang on the line. And I hadn't heard this expression before. This is an English I wasn't brought up with. You don't hang on a line. Somebody said to me the other day, we are going to, Christmas decorations. We put them at the Christmas tree. I think that's strange. Where does that come from? Language is changing all the time. I think what this means, and I'm thinking back to the original, for me, definition of a communicative approach, where you communicate with the intelligence, the super intelligence of an experience that your students bring with them. And Kumaravidivulu writes about this as well. Our hugely culturally and linguistically experienced students who come to us with this massive, rich cultural and linguistic experience. Okay, I'm going to finish there. It's almost 1:45. Perhaps we can make more sense of this by having questions. These are the people I've been referring to. I could have put lots of people there, but you can see who I'm thinking of. And my article, which is about this, is just about to come out in Language and Intercultural Communication. I mean, I really would recommend Rob Lowe's book on native speaker, the native speaker frame. Ciano is the one with many other people who talks about the issue of coloniality, who actually talks about structural functionalism and positivism as one of the colonial forces. And of course, there's Elif Shafak, the 40 Rules of Love, and Padwan and Smith, and there are all sorts of things going on in there which are very good. And of course, anything that Kumaravidivulu writes and so on. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor
Well, I
Holiday.
can stop sharing my screen now and see everybody.
Okay. Thank you again, Professor Holiday. That was absolutely amazing. This is, as I said before, this is something that I have very strong connection with. I think about this sort of things every day, and I really like the how you described um, the very culture, and you made the example of the glasses because that's kind of how it felt to me the first time I learned about this. It really felt like, oh, this is a different perspective. What is going to, it's like switching from glasses to contact lenses for the first time. Let me try and see how it feels like. And after a while, it's like, yeah, I'm not going back anymore to the old glasses because this feels so much better. I really enjoyed that. We have a question in the chat. Somebody wanted to know, can you tell us the title of the project you have been involved in?
Yes, it's called Child Up. It finished just over a year ago, and it was a Horizon 2000 or 2020 project, or I can't remember exactly. So Child Up, it's CHILDUP, and you can find it on the internet. And I think there was something like 9 European countries involved. And Claudio Baraldi has recently published a book about this with Routledge. And the key term which the project revolved around was hybrid integration. And the idea, and this was coined by the people in the project. And the idea is that you bring with you this massive hybridity, and you arrive in a new place, and you use that experience of your own hybridity to integrate in a hybrid way in the new space in which you arrive. And I think this is very important. So it puts aside this idea that you've got to somehow leave behind your culture and adopt a new one.
Right, thank you. I think David also shared the link to the project in the chat so people can
And if
check
you
can check
email
it
me, I
there.
can send you some references connected with that.
Okay, we have another question in the chat, but I think we had a couple of people who were raising their hands first. I think Steve Copeland has a question. Hello.
Hi.
Thank you. Hi, good morning. Thank you, Adrian. It's lovely to hear a personal view of all of this. As you say, writing for journals doesn't allow that. Although, ironically, I'm currently working with a couple of colleagues in the British Council writing an article on our personal experiences of Native-speakerism and
Yeah.
the native speaker myth and the monolingual myth. You referred to Kumara Valavedu in passing there, and he's written about how the issue of native-speakerism, which I think is your term, is firstly inherently racist, and
Yes.
secondly that by researching native and non-native, and by using those terms, you are strengthening the hegemony of native-speakerism.
Yes.
And this comes back in a way to the title of your talk. This is something I'm currently working on for a couple of papers. Almost everybody does what you've done today, what most people do when they're writing, and they either use the terms or they use them in inverted commas.
Yeah.
Again, following your lead. We're currently doing the same thing, and we do what most people do and acknowledge that this is an inadequate way of reflecting our objections to it. And yet, despite decades of work on this, no one has yet come up with a widely accepted alternative, despite the fact that you can't define native and non-native speakers, as again you've touched on today. What is there anything what can we be doing or should we be doing to actually make some progress away from the labeling that, as you say, is so inherent now and yet is inherently problematic?
Well, I mean, first of all, I don't think putting it in inverted commas is enough. Every single time I put native, non-native speaker, I put so labeled before it. This is a chore. It extends the sentence, but by extending the sentence, it makes us think. We also have to recognize and I'm thinking about all the people who, including Kanagaraja and Kumaravadivalu, who use the term non-native speaker as an act of resistance, as long as they always make it clear that this is a construction, so labeled. So that's important. And it has to be said again and again and again and again to keep it in people's minds. So keep the discourse visible. But other than that, I mean, why do we have to have these distinctions? Why do we have to have them? I mean, I like what De Wiley and Saito say about let's find another label. LX sounds ridiculous, but you know, it helped me. Everybody sitting in that room was an LX speaker of English. You could say that, but it's awful. Why do you even have to say this? This is what I don't understand, and I think that the entire fabric of the linguistics edifice could do a lot better if it just threw out all the labels and started looking at something different. You know, what is the point? When I'm sitting at the bus stop listening to these people next to me and I can hardly understand what they're saying, native, non-native speakers got nothing to do with it. But there's something to do with language variety and Englishes. Let's get down to the basics and talk about variety without trying to categorize everything.
Thank you. I mean, I'm sure most of us would agree with that. And yet here we are still using the terms in both our speaking and our writing.
Which is ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. But I mean, it is racism. And we're surrounded by it, and it's hard to get rid of it. It's how we think, unfortunately. I can see that Enrique, I'm down to hear what Enrique has to say, although Mona put her hand up earlier. I don't know, I'm not sharing this. So.
I think Mona was first. Before giving the floor to Mona, I just wanted to read something that somebody wrote in the chat about what you just said. What about speaking about multilingual speakers instead of non-native speakers?
Well, I'm beginning to think that I am a multilingual speaker of English. Because all the different types of English I use every day is absolutely enormous. So I think multilingual is very important. But you know, if it means that some people are then labeled as monolingual, I'm not sure that anybody is monolingual. This is the issue.
Right. Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Holliday. Mona, what was your question?
Thank you. I think it kind of relates to that. First of all, thank you, obviously, for this very interesting talk. I was wondering, though, about something that you said in the beginning, that kind of as soon as we have an acronym, people hold on to it. And to me, this also relates to our need to categorize things. So I was wondering, just your perspective, if we kind of very widely agree that so many things are almost impossible to categorize, and yet we just, as soon as we say native speaker, non-native speaker is not a good categorization system, the question is then what do we use, right? And then you've just said, why do we need these categories? Why do we need these labels? And I would agree, but my question there is, why, in your opinion, are people so insistent on using these labels? Or why is it that whenever we are done with one label or categorization system, we immediately jump to the next one? And then as that relates to, you know, publishing, why do we think, or why do you think that these labels are so central in publications and research?
I think this is our human weakness. It's the way that we are brought up. It's the way that we think. But that doesn't mean that we should be happy with it. And I sort of make a comparison with gender. I know that this continues to be an issue, but there are such things as men and women, but the labels that go with them and the stereotypes that go with them don't work. But every single day of our lives we have to work on this, because traditionally we're brought up with these. I mean, we are human beings have thousands of years of conflict. We're always competing with the people down the valley or in the next village or whatever, and trying to make ourselves better than them by giving ourselves a label. This is what we do. But we have to understand that we're doing it and not think that it's a matter of truth. So when we label something, we have to always remember deeply it's a heuristic device for whatever reason, whether it's political or academic or what. We should never be taken in by it. And I think that in many parts of our lives, we manage to do that. I also think that this very cultural idea, it suddenly liberates me, because I can now talk about my culture in a totally creative, figurative way, having broken away from this idea that it's a confining, defined thing, which is essentially different to something else. So this can be a liberation. But we've got to work on it every single day of our lives.
May I ask a follow-up question?
I don't know.
Very quick one.
I have time. I don't know whether we're confined by the clock or not. Yeah.
Because I'm a qualitative researcher. And obviously one of the main things is always that you need to prove that you're working in like very well established analytical frameworks and all of those things. So I was just wondering, because I like this idea, but again, looking at it as a research challenge, I guess, where does this very free, liberal, creative, cultural thinking, how can we unify or kind of bring that together with the need for qualitative research to kind of think in specific structures or to argue within those established?
I mean, you can't be a good qualitative researcher unless you recognize the intersubjectivity and the implicatedness in that of you as a researcher. So you have to deal with all those things in order to be a good researcher. You can't take anything for granted. This is part of the research discipline. So a phenomenological view, to me, although some people are trying to put it into a box, because that's what everybody's doing, to me, it's a basic aspect of all research, to try to see things differently. And that's how science progresses. I mean, the major breakthroughs in science have all been to do with a struggle to see things differently.
I can't disagree with that. So I'm going to be quiet now.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mona, for your question. Dr. Yurda, I think it's your turn now.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Adrian, for your talk. I mean, it was really very, very much interested, and I couldn't disagree with almost anything, everything you said. But there's something that I think I mean, it's not that I disagree, but I think, I mean, to me, when I was waiting for my turn, I was thinking it's like we agree in the ideas, but we might disagree on what's the actual practice to be done.
Yeah.
And it reminded me of reminded me of discussions within, the left, like socially. Do we want to implement like a socialist policy that questions capitalism and the nation state, or we work within it, right? And that brings me to your example at the waiting room. I mean, when you said, people were thinking, oh, he's a non-native speaker. I was thinking probably that nobody thought that. People thought, oh, he is a foreigner. That's the category they would have in mind, right? And again, we would agree that that's another imposed categorization on humans, right? Because we are all human beings, but we live within those categories, and they affect our lives. And so that brings me to the point of, I mean, I totally agree with saying, reminding people that this is a sort of an imposed category. So this so-called or so-labeled native, non-native speaker. What I'm sort of worried sometimes is that by emphasizing this idea that native speaker, non-native speaker distinctions are a construction, social construction that don't reflect any reality, we might get into silencing the voice of the non-native speaker. So I totally agree with what you said. I mean, I'm aligned with this idea of using the term, the category, as a way of resisting, of saying, hey, this is what we are. This is what people have made us. It's not what we are essentially, but it is what we are labeled, and therefore we claim the right to be, part of it, of this discussion, of this debate. And otherwise, we might become silenced, as we were, historically somehow, right?
No, I'm completely with you, and I've also thought about this a huge amount, and I was at a conference recently, and there was a guy there who was giving a presentation about English as an international language, and defining what English as an international language was in difference to American English and British English. And he saw me in the audience, and he obviously got very nervous because he knew what I was probably thinking. And we talked afterwards, and he said, you've got to understand my predicament. When I teach English, the prejudices are all around me, and how do I get my students to take me seriously? So I am using this label of English as an international language to give myself a cultural capital. He said it's an absolute construction, but it helps me to do what I want to do. Now, I think that's as long as we remember that these are labels that we are using for whatever reasons we're using. What worries me, and I think what Kumaravidivalu was saying, is that when people begin to reify these labels, as though they really are exactly what people say that they are, then we lose the understanding that this is construction. So simply by continuing every day to say so labeled, it helps. I mean, we're surrounded by these things. Here am I. I'm British. Of course, I know that this is a political construction. It's a very old one. But I know it's a construction, and everybody knows it's a construction. But sometimes these technical things, somehow, I don't know, we just got to keep it on the surface of our understanding that these are political constructions.
Totally agree. I'm totally agree. Just one more thing, and a brief question. When you were discussing whether we could find an alternative term to non-native speaker, I think we will never be able to find an alternative term, because I mean, precisely because this is a constructed category, doesn't exist. So there is no way we can find a term that reflects something that doesn't exist as such. I mean, it's only reflected by the term that has created the category. So I mean, any attempt will be fictitious and will be artificial.
And it seems to me that there's no scientific linguistic need for this term, because the need for it is to have a label,
exactly,
which people who are marginalized by it can use in order to say who they are.
If I may use an example, I mean, it's like using the category black. I mean, there was no. Yes. I mean, using alternative terms eventually became, even worse, right? So it's
yes.
So there was no other way than appropriate the term by the group and saying, hey, yeah, this is what we are. So what? I mean, this is not a problem because we are part of this.
So it's unfortunate. I mean, okay. I mean, the word black is how many people still think that black refers to something inferior? Okay, the problem with non-native speaker is that people who don't know what's going on automatically think it's inferior.
Right, but probably, I mean, people who appropriated the term black contributed to this upgrading of the word, right? So because it was perceived as inferior. So
but can you upgrade a word that begins with non?
yeah. Well, that's right. That's a point that's always been there. Okay, and not to monopolize, I have a very brief question. You mentioned Hanif Qureshi.
Yes.
Can you say what work you were referring to? Because
no, he was being interviewed on television last night.
Okay.
And obviously after his terrible illness, he was obviously paralyzed, but he was speaking perfectly well. And he was talking about his childhood in Britain as a member of the Muslim minority community. And he simply said, you know, we never thought of ourselves as being Muslims until we had to label ourselves in opposition to other people. I'm just telling you what he said. Yeah.
Okay.
And of course, you know, Andy Barciano, in his article, he also says, we can be anybody. We were labeled by the colonizers. This is divide and rule. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Holliday. I think Alexander had a question. He's sorry for making you wait so long.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. So my question is about the necessity of the distinction between native speakers and non-native speakers from the point of view of acquiring the language. Because the difference still exists, because it's one thing when you just acquire the language from, say, your parents, and there is a different thing when you start learning the language. And again, well, we cannot say, well, the first one is better, the second one is worse, because if we take teachers, a native speaker may just know that, well, we say so, but it may be a problem to explain why, especially when comparing with the student's language. And a non-native teacher may know how to explain. So in this case, we may need to have this awareness to understand what to expect. And to pay attention to the qualification, and for example, not to get any native speaker as a teacher without a teaching qualification. For example, I would find it challenging to teach my native language rather than English, because, well, I know how to speak it, but when I try when teaching to foreigners, I have to understand, to people who just have no idea. I have to rethink many things. And in this case, this awareness of native and non-native speakers may be helpful to understand what to expect from this person, what kind of explanations and what kind of comparisons. And we may think of, well, that catches distinction. Well, the first, the second, well, the inner, the outer, the expanding circle, not just native, second, and foreign. We may need more labels and more expectations, though of course we may not think of it. So maybe what if we keep it in mind, but be but not labeling it as good or bad, but labeling it as diverse and beneficial or non-beneficial in this or that situation.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's very clear that these categories are in people's minds when they employ English teachers, and they're certainly in the minds of parents when they send their kids to English classes. But do you know, in that article that I put in my bibliography by Kumarevadivalu, he's complaining about a conference that he attended in India. At CEFL, or what used to be CEFL, the EFL University, and the way that it was that they'd allowed it to be overtaken by external agencies and so on, the British Council and whatever, were fronting the whole conference. And you know, I was shocked, because that was the first time I know him. I was actually at the same conference, and when he labeled himself as a non-native speaker, I was shocked. I never thought of him as being a non-native speaker. Now, my wife, all her family, most of my students, most of my colleagues, all through my career, have been in this definition, non-native speakers. When I was an undergraduate student, I remember 2 lectures I attended, one by Karl Popper and another one by someone else I can't remember. They both speaking English with strong Central European accents. I just took it as being normal. It never occurred to me that they were non-native speakers. I don't believe that before this English teaching thing began to happen, anybody cared about this. So you're right, it's meaningful within a professional set of circumstances, but I see no evidence that somebody who's born speaking English is a better teacher or knows it better. A lot of people I know who were born and brought up speaking English don't know anything as much about it as my wife does, who was born speaking a different language. And she probably has more awareness because she was born speaking a different language. I mean, I was born speaking Yorkshire English, and it was drummed out of me when I went to university in the South. And you know, if you read Sarah Cheney, he's got a very good argument for getting rid completely of this inner outer circle business. It's completely out of date. These are all structures that are used to confirm these labels rather than being helpful. So, you know, why do I need to know that someone's a non-native speaker? I mean, no. If they are suffering because they're labeled as such, that's a completely different matter. Then it's a political issue.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for your question, Alexander. We have another person who has a question, Katalin. Hello.
Yes, hi. Actually, I don't have a question. I have just some commentary to make, if I may. And so, first of all, I'd like to thank Professor Holliday for this very thought-provoking talk, and all those who have contributed to the discussion, because I think I found that really.
Actually, there's an awful echo, and I can't hear very well.
I can't do anything about the echo, unfortunately.
I think
so
I'm
shall
getting.
I continue or just?
Yeah, I'll try my best.
And as I was listening, I was thinking that with due respect, your talk was still very much within framework of colonialist discourse.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Audre Lorde came to mind, who said that the master's tools will never dismantle the master house. And I feel that the first step, also reflecting to what Steve Copeland said, the first step to progress out of this situation that we find ourselves in would be to allow us who are labeled non-native, so we are on the other side, we are the them in the them category, to allow us to actually decide what we want to think about the English language, what we want to think about English language teaching, and how we want to live with what we think. because there is, I felt this undercurrent that now it is not okay to talk about non-native speakers unless it is political resistance and other things that we are not supposed to do. But this is coming from the colonialist establishment. And that's what I find problematic. I think we need to decide for ourselves, and we need to be allowed to do so. And we need to be considered an equal partner in that. And we need to actually elevate our discussion on an equal to an equal platform. I think that would be the first step to progression.
This is very, I mean, I can't say obviously that I am liberated from a colonialist discourse, because my entire upbringing has been part of a colonialist discourse. So that's one thing. Yeah, this is very difficult. On the other hand, if I'm sitting in a hospital in Britain and around me are people from across the world, and I can see how they are being marginalized in the minds of people who are looking on, this becomes my issue, because I'm one of those people who's looking on. So I'm writing about these things because I have a responsibility to try to undo the colonialist narrative that I have been brought up with. So I'm not speaking for anyone else but myself. My major message is that people like me need to think differently, because, you know, it's just not good enough. And so that's my defense. And I had this discussion years and years ago with Kanagaraja, that all I can do is speak for my personal experience of how these colonialist discourses operate from the inside. And, you know, I know this inside out. And so when I see so labeled international students in the university, and they say to me, if you ask us to talk about how we are marginalized and how we are prejudiced against, we would never stop talking. This is what somebody told me very recently. We can't even speak. There's so much to say. And this comes from people very close to me as well. But I can see what's going on, and I can see where that marginalization comes from. And therefore I have to do something about it. And, you know, in my own small, insignificant way. And, you know, the book I wrote recently, Contesting Grand Narratives of the Intercultural, I seriously felt I had to go back to my time in Iran and really unpack where my thinking came from. So, yeah, I of course, I agree with absolutely everything that you're saying, but I also have a voice, which I think is important for people like me to listen to. I don't know if that helps or not. I probably dug myself deeper into the issue. But also, I was at a university in Tehran about over 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and I was asked to do a question and answer session with Iranian undergraduate students, and I was overwhelmed by the way that they were in touch with a massive interrogation of concepts. But then more recently, I notice that academia in places like that has been invaded and continues to be invaded by soft, naive positivism. And yeah, and so things are moving backwards, because this power of soft, naive positivism that comes from the West, I think, is just continuing to invade. And you know, I just don't know what to do about that. It's so difficult. And so when I hear a conference presentation from somebody recently from Pakistan talking about the new ideas in applied linguistics, I think, my God, you should have heard what your grandparents were talking about. These are not new ideas at all. These are old, simplified Western ideas that are somehow invaded. And you go back to people in the 1990s who I know, they wouldn't tolerate this. Yeah.
Nice. Thank you, Professor Holliday. We have a couple of questions from the chat. I will read them for you. So one person said, "This is very interesting. I was once in a teacher training context and referred to myself as a non-native speaker to mediate the difficulty of a particular linguistic cultural teaching task. But the trainer responded, 'But you know you're not really a non-native speaker.' I guess she was referring to my English proficiency, but it was interesting to be refused this self-categorization. What are your thoughts on this?"
Sorry, can I find that? I didn't quite catch that. Oh yes, this is very interesting. I was once okay. Well, I think that's fascinating. I would accuse the trainer for using the category and correcting somebody. I mean, what do I have the right to say to anybody, "You are not a non-native speaker"? I don't know. It's crazy. This is a discourse going round and round, and yeah, I don't know. I mean, you mentioned the word black. Under what circumstances could I say, "Oh, but you're not a black person at all"? I mean, you just can't do this. It makes no sense. It's a ridiculous. It's a ridiculous conversation. So just having that conversation means that the entire framing is native-speakerist.
I think that's a very interesting answer. Yeah, definitely. And Dr. Yurda, yes.
Well, if I may say so, it's just another way of showing who has the power.
Yes.
It's about that. I mean, I am the native speaker, and I can decide. I can tell. I have the authority.
Exactly.
You don't have any voice. It's again silencing the non-native speaker.
Yeah.
So-called, so labeled.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's a difficult. So what do you do if you're the person who's being spoken to? Either you brush it aside because you want to get on with the class, or you start dealing with it, and then it becomes very difficult. And these are the predicaments that we're in, you know. Yeah. So I mean, there was a television series on recently. It was called "This Is Going to Hurt," and it was set in a maternity ward in a hospital. And the doctor who was the main protagonist was in a room with a black nurse, and the patient started complaining and saying, "I don't want to be treated by this nurse. I don't want to be treated by this nurse." And so the doctor then started to protect the nurse and started to stick up for her. And afterwards, outside, she said to him, "I don't need you to defend me in front of that patient." mind your own business. You don't understand what's going on. It's that sort of thing. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Thank you, Professor Holliday. There was one person who wanted to have a look at your bibliography once more, if possible.
He's bringing it back on the. So I've got to share the screen again. Okay, so here we go. Oh, where's it gone? What's happened to it? This is technically, we were looking at this before. This is technically very difficult. Share the screen?
Yeah, and instead of sharing the entire screen, you just share the presentation window.
Well, I don't know what happened to my. Oh, here we go. Here we go. This is so.
Yeah. This is
well,
good.
I can bring it up without putting it. Yeah, I can do that. And then there's the second page. All right.
And I think I can. If anybody would like the slides, the presentation slides, with your permission,
Yes,
I could share
I
them.
emailed it to you yesterday, so you can definitely share that. Yeah.
So, okay, if anybody has any need for the presentation slides, just send me an email. You should find my contact on the LNet websites, and I will send it to you. Before we wrap everything up, I do have one last question, and it's quite related to the bibliography, because I was looking at it and I saw a very interesting study, the one by De Wele and Saito,
Yes.
because it was what I was interested in was the it seems to have I was not aware of this study, but it seems to be looking at native speaker ideology from a psycholinguistic perspective,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
they seem to be. Can you tell us something about that? Because that's something very interesting.
Well, I have to admit that I didn't understand most of it because it was too technical for me. But I actually had a conversation with Jean-Marc de Wiley about it, about the article, and he drew my attention to the suggestion for LX users of English. So I'm not I can't claim to really understand the sort of psychology, but I just think when he says positive psychology, you know, there's a huge technical thing going on here. Let's just try and move it to something more positive. I think that's basically what the argument was. Yeah. But I can't tell you very much about that.
No worries. I was just really interested because I think I understand what they mean with this term. I think I understand, and this is something that emerged in my doctoral study. And I was not aware that somebody had found something similar before. So I'm going to have a look because it sounds quite interesting. Oh, thank you. Thank you for sharing this in the chat. All right. I think we've taken a lot of Professor Holiday's time, but I think if anybody has any more questions, I think you could forward them to me and I can send them to Professor Holliday with his permission, if that's all right.
Or I don't mind if you even email me directly.
Yeah, that's a great thing. You could share, could you write your email in the chat, maybe?
Do I know how to write in the chat? Just a minute.
Yeah. No, it's already set. You just click.
Here. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you. And this is my email in case you need to contact me.
.ac.uk.
Perfect.
I think that's right.
Yeah, looks perfect.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much for having me. It's been a huge pleasure.
Thank you, Professor Holiday. It's been a great seminar, and I hope we will have you again maybe sometime in the future. I will keep you updated as soon as the recording is ready on our YouTube channel, so that you might also be able to share it with whomever you want on your website as well. Thank you, everybody, for attending. I'm so happy to see so many of you today, and I guess I will see you to our next seminar, which still needs to be scheduled. Thank you so much, everybody.
Okay, bye everybody.